Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so drama happening in the conservative world. Benny Johnson, one of the main prominent figures in this movement, also one of the most astroturfed figures in this movement, one of the least authentic. This guy's pretty unbearable, and as I've noted before, he's one of the Tenet influencers who was taking money from Russian sources. Essentially, Russian money was being funneled to buoy certain conservative commentators like Tim Pool, who we're also going to be talking about here, Dave Rubin, and Benny Johnson, among others. So useful tools, although Benny Johnson was much less prominent. I would say that Benny Johnson has become more prominent in the last year or two because of that type of astroturf money, and he's always popping up in weird places to stir the pot in the most sort of extreme way that he can. What comes to mind is him being the one to ask Donald Trump the question, are you going to have communist Zohran Mamdani arrested if he disobeys ICE? Using pretty much that language, calling him a communist and invoking the idea of getting him arrested. And that made major headlines when Trump said that he might do that. And that was Benny Johnson that sort of pitched him that pre-made threat. So that's the type of astroturf messaging you get from this guy. He knows what his job is. He knows what he's supposed to do. It's pretty soulless when you look into him. He used to work for BuzzFeed and Newsmax and all these different conservative outlets. He got fired from a bunch of them multiple times, got fired for plagiarism, etc. So just an all-around creep. And now the conversation is moving towards the idea that he might be secretly gay. These accusations come up against a lot of these conservative guys. Steven Crowder has gotten this. There's all the rumors about the Grindr app goes down when the RNC is in town, which seems to be relatively true, but a little bit dubious. But it is a real thing that there's at least some evidence for. It's always just salacious, right? Like there's not that much substance there, except for the fact that, you know, these are often political commentators who are going against gay rights, and even in more of a draconian way now than they were maybe 10 years ago, trying to make the case that, you know, gay people are an abomination. Being gay is like some kind of demonic act and, you know, should be prayed out of you. They're kind of reviving the idea of conversion therapy. So that's where we're at in American politics. And Milo Yiannopoulos, one of the original conservative grifters in this type of space, was on Tim Pool's podcast with George Santos, weird group to have on there. And Milo Yiannopoulos threw out there that he thinks Benny Johnson is gay, that he thinks there's evidence for this. He also said the same thing about Charlie Kirk, I think, and throws out some relatively specific accusations, says that he has receipts and proof, but really he's just stirring the pot. Milo Yiannopoulos only pops up to stir the pot at this point. He just wants to get a reaction out of people, and he's firmly lodged within the conservative movement. He doesn't really direct his attention outside of that very much, probably because nobody really pays much attention to what he says outside of the right-wing world. But this is getting a little bit of traction, this thing about Benny Johnson, probably because there's a lot of ill will towards him in the Republican world and outside of it. So these are the statements that Milo Yiannopoulos made on Tim Pool's podcast about Benny Johnson.
One of the most distinctive things about the right wing in this country is its homosexual overtones. Benny Johnson posts pictures of his children every 2 days. It's weird. And everybody knows what went on with Benny Johnson in those lobbies and in those hotel rooms at SAS. Everybody knows.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Men, younger men, not underage. At least I don't know that. His wife was crying drunk in the lobby 3 SASs in a row about how her husband was upstairs with boys.
Come on.
Go ask her.
Come on.
Go ask her.
Come on, Milo.
Go ask her.
Milo, aren't you ever scared of getting sued? You say I'm sitting here like I am humbled by the lore and your ability.
The audacity.
I mean, Like, there's no teapots in this room right now to express how I feel.
George, I have said these things about people for 20 years and never once in my career been sued. I've issued 3 corrections in my entire journalistic career because I get my facts right, and people know that they do not want to go through discovery.
Actually, I want to say this.
I've never been sued for anything I've ever said about anyone.
The one thing I need to say this.
Because I'm right.
The most terrifying thing about
Yeah, so this act, Milo has been doing this for a while now, where he's like the bold truth teller, but he's also the sassy gay guy, but he's also anti-gay and was like trying to convert himself to Christian to not be gay anymore, even though that was clearly a grift because he's not really making any effort to not be that. And I think he's smart enough to know that that's not how it works, but he also knows that you can kind of just keep these right-wingers on the edge of their seat. You can keep them hooked if you spin this narrative about being gay and, working towards something better, working to cure yourself of it or to live a good old American lifestyle anyway. And he's right that is at the core of the conservative movement. It is a huge part of what I think motivates a lot of the hatred that currently roils within the conservative base. It's not all of it, but it's a big portion of it. And I think it's probably true that, conservative-minded people that are secretly gay, have repressed gay feelings, is like pretty close to the pulse of the culture at the moment. At least in terms of like what gets amplified the most. But this idea that conservatives who are the most motivated to put themselves out there and especially to advocate against gay people, advocate for a good old American family, converting yourself if you're gay or trans or whatever, a lot of times that is undergirded by, repressed feelings that these people themselves experience. Because when you don't experience those type of repressed homosexual feelings or whatever else it may be, you don't really feel the need to perform the act of having a family and being a, good old white American nuclear family. There's not as much of a desire to brand yourself that way. So when you see the tough guy masculine act from people like Steven Crowder and Benny Johnson, a lot of times it's kind of a dead ringer, that there's something else going on there. And then when you pair that with the biblical excoriations of gay people, trans people, anything that's not heteronormative, it paints a picture of people who, rather than trying to process their own feelings that they may be uncomfortable with because of the way they came up, they turn it into something that is more violent and, just a more reactionary solution to the problem. Instead of accepting the fact that you're gay, you push those feelings deep down and they sort of spring back as hatred towards others. So that is, I think, core to where the conservative movement is at currently. In terms of Benny Johnson, he has responded to this. He's kind of hinted that he's going to take some kind of legal action because he's being defamed, and in the name of my family, I have to respond to this. He's kind of trying to be the bigger person, hasn't mentioned Milo Yiannopoulos' name. Milo then responded by saying, "You can sue me if you want. I know you don't want to go to discovery. I know you don't want to lose a defamation case to Milo Yiannopoulos. I always have the receipts, and I can prove this, and I can prove that." So he's just puffing his chest out there. I don't think he has any proof of any of this shit. I don't think he can back up any of these claims. He's right that Benny Johnson isn't going to want to take this to discovery, and it's likely that that is where stuff would come out that might prove at least some of what Milo is saying. And he's right that if there is proof that what Milo is saying is true, then that would kind of blow any defamation case out of water. There's a reason that Milo does this type of fuckery within American politics. It's because it's harder for him to be sued for this. So this thing about how, I only say it if it's true and if I have my facts straight, that's a bunch of bullshit. This guy's a professional liar. We shouldn't take anything that he has to say very seriously. I think he's probably right about Benny Johnson. This idea that he has a bunch of receipts and evidence is horseshit. I mean, he kind of operates like Candace Owens. They come from the same world. They essentially just know that they can utilize terms like that to get audiences excited and to back people off. This is him trying to back Benny Johnson down by saying, I have evidence and you don't want any trouble with me and blah, blah, blah. But the reality is he doesn't want discovery any more than Benny Johnson does, because Milo has plenty of skeletons in the closet, as well as not wanting to reveal this kind of racket that he's set up his career as, knowing that if he says these kind of shocking and stupid things, it'll get people riled up. And then when he gets a response, when he provokes a response out of Benny Johnson, that's just more of an opportunity for him to turn the volume up. Now, that being said, I support Milo Yiannopoulos in this crusade. I don't think it's going to last because he'll have these little flashes like this and then it kind of goes away. He did the same thing with Kanye. Kanye wanted him to be like his manager for a second. Then next thing, what do you know? Milo Yiannopoulos is airing shit out about Kanye. That's just what he does. It's always a very little consequence. It's a lot of, fanfare for almost no substance. But in this case, I think that Benny Johnson is a good target. I think, like I said, I think his audience is almost entirely astroturfed. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who really is just like a fan of Benny Johnson on the merits. I think he just kind of has become part of the wash of conservative content, and he has been able to deliver on certain moments. Like I said, when he pitched that thing to Donald Trump about Zoran, communist, arrest him, or he also was the podcast that Trump's FTC director threatened Jimmy Kimmel and ABC on, leading to Jimmy Kimmel being briefly pulled from the air. That was Benny Johnson's program. So when it comes to stirring the pot and trying to take these institutional shots, Benny Johnson's usually the one who's there. I do not know why Milo Yiannopoulos is getting involved in that. Tim Pool makes sense that they're kind of associated. They take money from the same places. They kind of uphold the same narratives, but in different ways. I don't know how Milo Yiannopoulos fits into that. I know that he would take Russian money if he could. I don't think anybody's really willing to pay him at the moment because he doesn't have any meaningful audience. He's kind of washed up at this point, doesn't have too much to offer. But Tim Pool, in response to this, one of the other things that Benny Johnson said is that Tim Pool apologized and he's told him about some of the dark stuff that's going on behind the scenes, which is a weird way to hint at that. He's talking in very vague language in response to all this, but it's actually pretty clear what he's talking about when it comes to Tim Pool. I'll play a clip for you right now of Tim Pool talking about that, some of the security issues and financial issues that he's having at his show as of late.
And one thing is clear. The violence will get worse. It is going to escalate. We cannot keep going as status quo. Something has to change. It may be that, as we described after the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the threat to come and shoot up our studio and our workplace, we asked, at what point do we say we can't do this anymore? The cost of running Timcast IRL Studio and the projects around it exceeds the amount of money it brings in. That's just that breaking point, isn't it, for any business? The cost isn't cameras or lights. The cost is security because of the escalation. It's an artificial cost to doing business that we can't balance. We can't forego security, but we can't sustain it either. And there is a possibility that the 19th is the last episode of Timcast IRL. We are doing everything we can to make sure that's not going to be the case. But the cost is not just money anymore. The cost is the safety of my family, myself, and there are many ideas were floating around.
Yeah, so Tim Pool says that he can't afford the security that is now required because of the threats that are being issued against him, and he has had to bulk up his security, and it's making the entire operation of the show not feasible, which really is ridiculous when you think about it, because I believe that there's a lot of infrastructure when it comes to the technicality of the show. Tim Pool does different shows that are broken into different chunks, and streaming and editing and putting all that stuff out takes a certain amount of manpower, but not so much that the type of income that he's making from what he's doing would be going to all of that, even with added security. The whole point of doing this type of work, in my opinion, is that you can build an incredibly far-reaching business model on relatively little operational cost. So if that's not what you're doing on purpose, I don't really know what you're in this game for. A lot of these guys do this where they start building an audience, or they have an idea or whatever, and they try to turn into the biggest media operation that the world has ever seen, which is great. And in some cases, people through YouTube and stuff like that have been able to build huge machines behind what they do. But like in the case with TYT, I think building out that type of business model, it just makes it so that you have so many operational costs that you start to get buried under it, and it starts to make your behavior weird. So not only are you having trouble sustaining your business, but now you have to start doing weird business in order to keep things afloat. And I think Tim Pool is another example of that. I think he has even less scruples than a guy like Cenk Uygur in terms of where he's willing to take money from. But ultimately, I mean, if you have the type of audience that Tim Pool has, there's no reason that you should be struggling with your P's and L's, your operational costs. There's just no reason. So he says this because of security that they've had to hire, because the temperature is rising in the wake of Charlie Kirk being shot, etc. So a lot of that is just victimizing themselves that they're doing. Benny Johnson did the same thing, said that he has some guy stalking him or something, or somebody got, he said he was working with Cat Turd and the FBI to apprehend this guy who was trying to stalk him or something. And the reality is that, like, these are the chickens coming home to roost a little bit in both of these cases, in terms of these guys feeling like they're under threat to whatever extent that's true, but also this stuff about Benny Johnson and his lifestyle, potentially catching up to him through Milo Yiannopoulos. It's like these guys want to have their cake and eat it too. They're free speech warriors. They want to go out and say just about anything all the time and not have it come back to them in any way. But the reality is they've been encouraging and in some cases causing real world harm and then turning around and excusing that real world harm for a long time, especially on communities like gay people, trans people, immigrants, of course, and anybody who is vulnerable. And so now, because they're more powerful, because they're more visible, they are also more vulnerable. Not to actual violence, but just to threats of violence. But in Charlie Kirk's case, actual real violence that was done to him and ended his life in front of everybody, and I'm sure it did scare the shit out of a lot of them, including Tim Pool, even though he spends all his time at home in his little compound that he built. So I think a lot of this actually comes down to the denigration that they do of others. It's the reactionary mindset of you're put upon by, you know, civil rights of black people, civil rights of gay people, trans people, whatever it may be. You have a reactionary response to that. You reassert yourself, and you know, this idea of the nuclear family and the white man and a white hegemonic society, reasserting that as the mainstream cultural narrative. And it's done without, in my view, an appreciation for why those conditions fell apart in the first place. And that's where this conversation gets interesting to me when it comes to conservatives and these sort of repressed gay feelings, is that I feel like the part of the conversation that always gets missed when we talk about, you know, reestablishing these traditions and cultural norms, etc., is that it fell apart for a reason. So I'm not saying there's no place for like marriage or a traditional family. I think there is a place for that in our culture. I do think across the board it's like a strong way for people to live their lives and, you know, organize themselves. But it also, as a culturally reinforced narrative, it led to the exact type of cultural breakdown that these guys are always complaining about. So what they view as a result of wokeness and LGBTQ demons, whatever it is that they might want to call it, what it actually is the crumbling of a repressive societal norm. And that happens because of people being forced into certain roles, gender roles, sexuality roles, familial roles, and living under an immense amount of societal pressure to conform to that. And what that leads to, in my opinion, is a certain amount of conforming to that, but then also a certain amount of deviant behavior outside of it. So whatever the lines are that are arbitrated in terms of how you're not supposed to behave as a husband, as a wife, or as a child of a husband and wife, you start to want to color outside of those lines as just sort of a natural function of your humanity. And what that does is it undermines the stability of that concept of the family. It causes weird behavior, like men to live double lives, women to be abused, and kids to rebel and to create countercultural pushback to that nuclear family. In my view, that's what has gotten us to where we are. And so the reestablishment of the traditions is just going to lead to a similar type of pushback to that repression. And I think the type of violence that these guys are now finding themselves afraid of is the exact type of violence that has always been caused by conservative psychopathy, right? And by blasting that shit out into the universe all day, from many angles, it then becomes something that comes back around. Either it's someone who views themselves as defending their community against bigotry, or it's somebody like a Thomas Crooks who themselves is dealing with some version of repressed feelings towards this conservative movement, these political figures, whatever, and so they lash out violently. And when it comes to sexual violence and also political violence, the most common perpetrators of this stuff is white males, straight white males, especially when it comes to sexual violence. For all of the talk of how trans people are a threat to children and all that, by far, the people that commit the most sexual crimes against children are white men that consider themselves straight, and many of them have families. And so the reality is, just to wrap this up, there is no room in the conservative movement for gay people, homosexuality, transgender people. They will invite you in so that you'll speak for them. And they will serve you narratives about how you can repress who you are so that you can fit in better. But they will never accept you because the ideology is against the concept of accepting people like that. And they'll only do it as sort of like a devil's bargain to make themselves look more progressive than they are. But ultimately, those people are always going to be marginalized and they're always going to deal with a certain amount of abuse. And so the only way for someone who is gay or trans or whatever to fit in the conservative movement is to repress themselves. And that, either on your part or on a part of somebody who is reacting to the things that you say and reacting to you inflicting your repression onto them, is going to lead to violence. And it's going to lead to unstable family units that ultimately are going to be the downfall of this new age conservatism. How spectacular and how bloody and how soon that will all be, I'm not sure. But these cracks and these disagreements that we're seeing between these clowns that have been astroturfed to the top of the conservative movement, it is going to characterize what ultimately disables that movement. It's really just a matter of time.
Too close to, too much to do. The mission is too crucial. Shout it out from the rooftops until I lose vocals. Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity.